there is a scene in which Hideko is taking a bath.
A bath.
And then she helped her.
Hello everyone, explore dramas, webtoons, and novels and explore all sorts of stories from Korea. This is Who Reads Stories. My name is An Sung-jin. I'm a news features reporter, and here we have Andrea.
Yeah, hi. Oh, well, nice to meet you again. I think.
Good to see you, Andrea, again.
Yeah. I study Korean culture here at the Academy of Korean Studies, so good to be here with you today.
Great to have you again, Andrea. And today we're going to be talking about one of his more known, a little bit more famous movies that he's made. It's also based on a novel, and it's called The Handmaiden.
Whoa,
Woo!
let's do it.
Yeah, should we look at it together?
Yes.
Okay, so now let's look into this. So for the Handmaiden movie itself, again, as we talked about it, it is based on a novel, and the novel is actually from a British author. Her name is Sarah Waters, and her book was actually in a similar background, and it was called Fingersmith. Now, to briefly go over what the novel itself was about, it basically was based in the Victorian era from the 19th century.
Yeah, so it's really interesting how let's say the original blueprint of the movie, it's this book that was released in 2002. So I think it's like interesting to see also the changes,
right?
Because it's like Victorian era. Here we are talking about colonial times,
right? Exactly, as you just mentioned. Now, director Park Chan-wook actually moves this entire novel into the background of the 1930s colonial Korea, and he actually tries to bring this huge transition. Do you know what this period was like, Andrea?
Yes, well, despite that I have been more into after the 60s regarding Korean history, I know how it was like at the beginning of the 20th century. So in 1905 was first the protectorate, later in 1910 was the annexation of Korea, and like from 40 years we are talking about a period of colonial time under Japanese rule. Something that for me it's interesting is that in this movie we are talking about specifically about the decade of the 30s, and when you study a little bit of how was like the politics and the laws of Japanese at that time, during the 30s actually it was, let's say, the highest cultural assimilation that Korean people have, because at that time they couldn't use their names, so they needed to use Japanese names.
Right. And what exactly was a stark difference when the characters were using Korean versus Japanese?
I think that there were like several scenes that when they were using Japanese, it was also a kind of a status and they were showing power. But then when they were using Korean, I think it was more in a private sphere. So like the Japanese was more like for the open, yeah? But then the Korean was more when they were kind of showing their true feelings, when they were kind of being more close or even intimate between them.
Now, I guess The Handmaiden revolves around the two main characters. We have Hideko and Suki. And although in the outfront, on the surface, it seems like the men are the main character, but actually we know that it's how these two women characters, how these two female characters are making it through their way within the story.
And we can see that with Hideko. There is one part in the movie that she says, I arrived here when I was 5 years old, and after that, I haven't really been out.
Right, that's actually really interesting because you bring up two major aspects that the movie actually delves into, which is obviously the role of woman and the role of love, which is obviously different from the modern love that you just mentioned. But it's interesting because, as our viewers say, Lady Maiden actually plays a big role. And I guess in this movie, we end up going over the concept of, in Korean, we say it 현모양처, and it actually means a wise mother and a good wife, which I guess actually back then, it used to be the model for a lot of women, right? Being that perfect wife, staying at home and doing all these household chores as a traditional woman was kind of the concept or the expectations that those people back then had for women, which is why it's interesting in this movie, or for people back then, they probably wanted to keep their individualistic characteristics and seek for love or their dreams. So for those who haven't watched our story or the movie yet, from out of our viewers or from anyone else who hasn't watched the movie, is there a scene in particular that you enjoyed or you would recommend for anyone who hasn't watched it?
For me particularly, there was one part in the library that I take it like somehow destruction in the library, somehow it's a metaphor for freedom. But there is a major spoiler with that, so I'm going to go with another one. And it is like there is a scene in which Hideko is taking a bath.
A bath.
And then she helped her. And she helped her like to clean, I think, like her mouth. And this scene, it's like somehow showing how they were, I don't know, like building somehow trust, like between them. And then how it was one of the first like times that they were close like to each other. And it's really interesting because like in this scene, it's also like, I don't know, like showing more like for the viewer. Well, if someone maybe want to learn a little bit more about how was the Japanese period and like the colonization like during the first decades of the 20th century, I think that like the localization of the movie at that time can just give you hints. Like maybe it's not as well as watching a documentary or reading a book of what happened, but it's showing you like kind of clues of how was the life at that time.
You really get to see it.
Yeah, like with the use of Japanese names, or like with this idea also of using like Western clothes or kimonos. So here we are seeing also like the cultural assimilation was high at that time. So if you want to learn a little bit about like that period of time in Korea, I think that this movie is interesting because there are not a lot of products that I know. If you know something else, like just let us know, like about like this specific period of time. So I think it's interesting also for that.
Right, exactly. As you mentioned, I guess it's a good way to see what the 1930s or what that time frame in Korea was like. Also, I think it's impressive to see how the emotions that come out throughout the movie aren't something that's specific to that time frame. It's not something specific tied to the 1930s, right? We see emotions that are universal and timeless. We see love, we see betrayal, hatred, desire, and all these emotions kind of come together to not only talk about a background that's then, but also that comes to now.
Well, I really enjoyed the discussion. It was great, like to talk about the Handmaiden, and I think in general this one is a good movie, a great movie. I want to watch it again. Well, I want to just like find more stuff like in the movie, because I think there are like things that if you watch it just one time, probably is not enough.
It's interesting you bring that up because apparently a lot of movies by director Park Chan-wook, you have to revisit it several times. Maybe in the first time you just read through it so you can understand the plot. The next time you try to find out different clues, as you just mentioned. Maybe there are different ways of interpreting the story. So I guess for our viewers that have already maybe watched it once, they can watch it the next time to see a different meaning or a different underlying layer to it. And thank you again, Andrea, for showing up and also talking about history because you're very knowledgeable about that part. And next week, we'll come back with more stories. So if you liked our episode today, please subscribe, leave a comment in our YouTube channel so we can read over it. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. There we go. See you next week. Thank you.